Hey, what's up, A&P students? Welcome to the video on the first lab for Bio 2050. So this is anatomy and physiology, right? This is anatomy and physiology. So one of the things we're doing in this class is we're studying the structure of the human body, all right? And in order to study the structure of the human body, we have got to have a frame of reference. All right, so we're doing anatomy. And anatomy is the study of structure. All right, so that's what we're doing in anatomy. We're studying structure. And so, what are we studying the structure of? Structure of the human body. And in order to do that, we have to have a frame of reference, a way we always talk about the human body. And that frame of reference here is how this person is standing. And that frame of reference is known as anatomical position. Anatomical position. So check her out. She's standing, feet are flat in the ground, about shoulder width apart. Body is, standing erect, head is up, eyes are forward, and the palms are facing forward too. So this is anatomical position. Whenever we talk about the human body, we're always talking about it in this position. So maybe you're sitting down right now. If we were talking about your human anatomy, we would be imagining you in this position. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Let's keep on going. So also on this same picture, we have a lot of directional terms. Directional terms like anterior, ventral, posterior, dorsal, superior, inferior, proximal, distal, lateral, medial. All these directional terms let us describe where human body structures are. So we're going to go through all of these directional terms. It's one of our goals for today, is to go through all those directional terms. Now, I do want to point out that we were previously looking at a human. So here's a human, right? And now we're looking at a horse. All of a sudden we got a horse here. Now, why am I doing this? Why am I showing you the horse? So notice that the human is standing on what? The human is standing on how many feet here? The human is standing on 2 feet. Another way to say that is this human, just like me, is a biped. So all of these directional terms here are in reference to a biped. Okay. Now, why, in that case, am I also showing you a horse? Well, let's think about this horse for a second. This horse is not a biped. 1, 2, 3, 4 means this horse is a quadruped. And as a quadruped, we're going to have some differences. Quadrupeds and bipeds are not going to be the same in terms of these directional words because of the biped quadruped difference. Now again, why are we bringing this up? Well, in this human A&P 1 and 2 course that we're going to do, we're going to do some dissections. And we're not dissecting humans, we're dissecting primarily sheep. So we're looking at sheep hearts, sheep brains, sheep lungs, and sheep are quadrupeds. So when it comes time to use these animals, we got to bear in mind there are these differences. We're going to go over some of these differences in a little more detail in a sec. Okay. So if I go back to a human here in anatomical position, I got a pair of my directional terms I want to discuss with you. First pair I want to do is superior and inferior. Now these are relative terms. What that means is I will always say something like the blank is superior to the blank. We would never just say the blank is superior. Like, I would never just say the eyes are superior. Okay? I would always say the eyes are superior to something else. The eyes are superior to the chin. For example, I would also flip that around, right? I would say something like the chin is what? Inferior but I would never put a period there. I would always say inferior to what? Inferior to the nodes. So as you probably gathered, if something is up higher, it is superior. If something is down lower, it is inferior. And we always use those relative to something else. So for example, here's one for you. Here is the umbilical region. So the umbilical region, just going to abbreviate there, is blank to the sternal region. So how would you fill in that blank right there? The umbilical region right here is blank to the sternal region. Well, you'd look at it and you say, okay, umbilical is lower, it's under it. So the answer therefore would be inferior. Fairly straightforward, hopefully. Okay. So that's two directional terms down. Let's do some more. All right, got another pair of directional terms here. Medial and lateral. Notice this guy has a dashed line down his middle. That dashed line down the middle, appropriately enough, is called the midline. Now, if something is closer to the midline, it is medial. So medial sounds like midline. Medial sounds like middle. If something is closer to the midline, it is medial. If something is farther away, it is lateral. And again, these are relative terms. Okay, you're never just going to say X is medial. You're always going to say medial to what? So for example, the eye is blank to the ear. Fill in that blank. Well, the eye is closer to the middle, closer to the midline. So I would fill in that blank with the word medial. Excuse my terrible handwriting when I write with the mouse here. So the eye is medial to the ear. I can then flip that around and say the ear is lateral to the eye. All right, good stuff. Medial and lateral. But we're not done. There's some more anatomical terms. Another set of anatomical terms I've got here are proximal and distal. Now, proximal and distal, I'm only going to use when I'm talking about limbs. So if I'm in my limbs, I'm using the words proximal and distal. The word proximal, think about it meaning like closer. Think about like the word approximate or proximity. Distal, that's something farther. Think about the word distant. So if something is closer to the shoulder or to the hip, it is going to be proximal. If something is farther from the shoulder, farther from the hip, it's going to be distal. So, for example, let's compare two things in the arm. The elbow is blank to the wrist. So, we know we're in a limb. So if we're in a limb, we're using proximal and distal. And we got to ask ourselves, okay, is the elbow closer to the shoulder or farther from the shoulder compared to the wrist? And definitely the elbow is closer to the shoulder than the wrist is. So the answer is going to be proximal. If we flip this around, turn this guy around, we would say the wrist is blank to the elbow. Well, the wrist is farther away from the shoulder than the elbow is, right? Greater distance, so we would use the word distal to fill in this blank. Fantastic. All right, making our way along here. Whoops. I'm going to backtrack for a second. I want to go back to this person here because I want to cover a pair of terms that I should have done earlier. Kind of forgot about them. So we have a word here that's anterior. Anterior means on the front. Anterior means on the front. So your front surface is your anterior. Your back surface is your posterior. Now humans as bipeds, we got another word for anterior. The word anterior is synonymous with the word ventral. So the word ventral literally means belly side, and belly side is the same side as the front. So these words are going to be synonymous. Similarly, we got a pair of synonyms in the back. The word posterior means the back side or toward the back, and in bipeds, a synonym for that is dorsal. So dorsal and posterior are synonyms, anterior and ventral are synonyms. So we could say this is her anterior surface. We could also say this is her ventral surface. We can say this is her posterior surface or her dorsal surface. Okay? Now if I jump to my horse here, anterior is towards the front, but anterior and ventral are no longer synonyms. Posterior towards the back, towards the butt side, if you will, and then dorsal is opposite ventral. So while posterior and dorsal were synonyms for the biped, and anterior and ventral were synonyms for the biped, they're not synonyms for the quadruped. All right, I meant to cover those words earlier. Not sure what happened there, but let's go back to where we were. Got another pair of directional terms here. And one of them is superficial. The other one is deep. So superficial and deep. Now these are relative terms again. If something is closer to the body surface, it is superficial. So something that's superficial is closer to the body surface. Closer to the body surface. That's some terrible handwriting there. Glad I'm speaking as I say this. Closer to the body surface is superficial. If something is deep, it is farther from the body surface. Okay? So for example, muscles are blank to skin. Well, obviously muscles are not as close to the surface, right? So you would say what here? You would say muscles are deep to the skin. And conversely, the skin is going to be superficial to your muscles. If we look at some layers of the skin here, there's a layer of the skin called the epidermis. My epidermis is superficial to my dermis. Epidermis is closer to the surface. On the other hand, my dermis is deep to my epidermis. Nice relative terms here. Very good, very good. Let's keep going. Couple more terms to learn. Another pair of words we got here are ipsilateral and contralateral. Now, lateral literally means side. Ipsi is same side. So ipsilateral is literally same side. So my right arm and my right leg are ipsilateral. They're on the same side of the body. Now, contra means opposite. So contralateral literally means opposite side. And for example, my right arm, my left leg, they're on opposite sides of the body. So my right arm and left leg are contralateral to each other. So we're going to encounter these terms especially when we get into the nervous system. We'll see these guys. All right, amazing. Let's keep going. One of the first things I mentioned was that anatomy is the study of structure. And when you are doing structure, you are going to have to cut things. And there are two basic cuts we can make and it demonstrated through a tube here. We can cut along the short axis of the tube. That's what we're doing right here. We're cutting it this way. And that is called a cross section, better known as a transverse section. We can also cut on the long axis of a tube, and that is called a longitudinal cut. Now, there are a lot of organs that are tubes in our body. Think about intestines, blood vessel, ureters, fallopian tubes, etc. And so when we look at those organs, for example, in a microscopic view, they've been cut. So we'll see rings where things have been cut transversely, and we'll see, these long parallel structures when things have been cut longitudinally. Now, when you make a longitudinal cut through a tube, you're kind of done. Not much more you can do. But for the human body, we can get a little bit more specific. So notice I've got a human here, and I've got a quadruped. Whoops, I advanced it, didn't mean to. And we've got some, pieces of plexiglass going through these two guys here. And so if we are cutting along this pinkish one here, that is the transverse plane through our biped. Notice it's different than the quadruped. So transverse plane through our biped is going to be along that short axis, separating the body or a particular structure into an inferior and superior portion. Now, notice that besides this transverse plane, we got two longitudinal planes. We have a longitudinal plane going down the midline. That's called the mid-sagittal plane. So mid-sagittal right down the middle. Mid-sagittal cuts us into equal left and right halves. There's also a plane cutting us into front and back halves. This is a longitudinal plane as well, but it's called a frontal one. So notice for a biped, we've got a transverse plane across the short axis, but here we have two longitudinal, one that divides us into lefts and rights, that's mid-sagittal, and one that divides us into a front and a back, that's called the frontal plane. Now, if I backtrack for a second, with our tube, there's no front or back, left or right of a tube, so you just have a longitudinal cut. You don't have a frontal or a mid-sagittal cut. So again, in a biped, transverse going across, and then right now we got two longitudinal cuts along the midline, dividing us into basically equal left and right halves is a mid-sagittal cut. And then dividing us into a front and back, like an anterior and posterior portion, that is called a frontal cut. Now, mid-sagittal cuts are often said to be equal. But of course that equal has, air quotes on it, because we're not entirely equal. Like even, on the outside we're very similar, but our left and right sides are slightly different. On the inside, our heart is more to the left, our liver is more to the right, our spleen is more to the left. So it's not perfectly equal, of course. Okay, there's another cut. It's also longitudinal. It's demonstrated by the green line here. This is a cut that divides us into unequal left and right portions. So it's a longitudinal cut, but it's creating unequal left and right portions. And that type of cut is called a parasagittal cut. So think about parasagittal as being like parallel to midsagittal. So those are my 3 basic cuts, and we got to know those. All right, here is a brain. This brain has been sliced mid-sagittally. So this is the right half of the brain here. Mid-sagittal cut lets us see the interior of the brain, lets us see a lot of the important structures, which is what we do in anatomy. This is a mid-sagittal cut of a skull. You can see the inside of the cranial cavity. A lot of different cool stuff here. This is can you figure out what this is? It's a skull. Can you tell me what kind of cut it is? It is a transverse cut of the skull. So it's going across. The brain sits in here. This is a hole for the spinal cord down here. So transverse cut of the skull. Now this is a heart. This is a frontal cut of the heart. So we still have a right side and a left side. So right and left haven't been separated. So this is a frontal cut. So it's a longitudinal cut, but left and right have not been separated. So the heart was cut frontally. This blood vessel right here, this vein right here, was cut transversely. Notice that we see a ring. All right, cool. This is my last picture. This is the trachea and the esophagus. There are 2 tubes in our bodies. So we've cut them transversely. And if you actually touch your neck right now, you can probably feel your trachea. Your trachea is in front of your neck. And so your trachea would be considered anterior to your neck, or your trachea is in the front of your neck. It's in front of your esophagus. So your trachea would be considered to be anterior or ventral to your esophagus. Your esophagus would be posterior or dorsal to your trachea. So that, folks, is our first one. We are done our first lab video here. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.